Hello, I am Peter Okwacha. Welcome to Focus on Africa, our top stories. Security in the Sahel. African defense and foreign ministers meet following increased violence in the region. 24 soldiers from Mali died in the latest attack.
The
United Nations must reform itself, not in terms of who are the permanent members, but also in its peacekeeping policy, which is not in line with today's terrorism challenges.
Boosting German investment in Africa. Angela Merkel hosts 12 of the continent's leaders will be live in Berlin with the latest. University students launch a campaign to end sexual harassment in Kenya's higher learning institutions. Also on the program, power to the people. Ethiopia's Sidama region, home to 4 million people, prepares to go to the polls in an autonomy referendum. And in sports, a surprise result in the 2021 Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers as Ethiopia beats Ivory Coast. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. We begin in Dakar, where foreign ministers from across Africa have been meeting for a second day to discuss the growing security crisis in the Sahel region. In the latest in a series of attacks, Mali's army said 24 soldiers were killed and nearly 30 others wounded by Islamist militants close to the country's northeast border with Niger. At the beginning of November, a similar attack at the border with Niger killed 50 Malian soldiers. A few days later, Burkina Faso suffered its deadliest attack on its soil as nearly 40 people were reported dead after gunmen targeted buses carrying mine workers employed by a Canadian company. There's been few responses as the G5 Sahel Joint Force said they killed 24 terrorists and seized military hardware in the Gourma region this month. And the Burkinabe army said it neutralized 32 terrorists over the weekend in the north of the country. And add to these, of course, the Boko Haram insurgency in northeastern Nigeria, Cameroon and parts of southern Chad. Well, defense and foreign ministers from across Africa are meeting in Dakar, Senegal to discuss security, in particular in the Sahel region. Louise De Wast has more on this story.
This forum is taking place in a very difficult regional context. Yesterday, the Malian army announced that 24 soldiers and 17 militants were killed in a joint operation with Niger. In Burkina Faso, there are attacks nearly daily. And there are many reasons behind the worsening violence, but one of them discussed during this forum is the lack of resources, of training of these national armies. These are areas where groups linked to Al-Qaeda, to the Islamic State group, are known to operate. And during the opening ceremony yesterday, Senegal's President Macky Sall denounced this situation despite the presence of more than 30,000 soldiers in the region, a sentiment shared by his Mauritanian counterpart, Mohamed El Ghazouani.
The United Nations must reform itself, not in terms of who are the permanent members, but also in its peacekeeping policy, which is not in line with today's terrorism challenges.
While governments are understandably concerned with the worsening security, a number of experts here insist that military responses must be incorporated in political responses because the violence, they say, is also spreading due to social and economic challenges.
Well, I'm now joined from Dakar by Bakary Sambe. He's Executive Director of the Timbuktu Institute, which is also known as the African Center for Peace and Studies. Now, Bakary, there are lots of troops on the ground all over the Sahel, but they don't seem to be getting the desired results. Why is this?
Thank you very much. It is a kind of paradox. More and more we have foreign troops in Africa, but the security is not here. I think that now there is a kind of perception conflict of the conflict between the international conception of the Sahelian crisis and the local perception. people are more and more living under very hard security pressure and security and in a context of lack of security, in a context of insecurity. This is the problem, as stated the Senegalese president yesterday. I think that we need to change the paradigm in the Sahel if we want to solve this problem.
So there has to be a paradigm shift you're talking about. I mean, let's talk about the foreign involvement in the fight against these militants in the Sahel region, because we do know that there are foreign boots on the ground. What exactly is their role, the French, for instance?
It is really a problem when the population do not understand the reason of this very intensive military presence. But you know, Serval or now Barkhane, it was in French was invited to be here by the Malian president. Also, the G5 Sahel is seeking to international support, mostly from France. The problem now is if you talk about MINUSMA, people can think that, okay, the MINUSMA is not here to fight the terrorists. And also, like the French troops also in Mali are not here directly to fight the troops. So there is a big misunderstanding between the African countries and their foreign partners and their Western partners, as you can remark during the last summit in Sochi, where they asked to the European countries, to the Western countries, to change their paradigm and to move forward and to try to find solution. You know, more and more people are dying in these countries.
Bakary, if I may just come in here. I mean, this conference is taking place in Senegal, which is, of course, is a country largely unscathed by these attacks. But should it and indeed other countries in the region like Ghana and Ivory Coast be worried?
Sure, I think that Burkina Faso, which is attacked every day, is not a final objective. Burkina Faso is an intermediary goal for them. I think the real purpose for this terrorist group is to reach the coastal countries. And as we can see, a few months ago, we see the attack in the border between Ghana and Burkina Faso. And those troops was supported by some group coming from Mali. Now the issue is how to protect the coastal countries to be not against terrorism and these terrorist attack. And now is a new challenge. Yesterday, the French Prime Minister said that, okay, those countries are not attacked really like Mali or Burkina Faso, but they are part of the solution.
And very briefly, Bakary, very briefly, is dialogue with the militants even a remote possibility?
I can say everywhere in the world, you have in Spain, in Northern Ireland, people, the final solution is dialogue. We have never seen a battle finish in the battleground, and I think that the issue is not dialogue; it's how to officialize the dialogue, because dialogue is here. But countries like Mali are not ready for that. Indeed, because of their preoccupation is to protect the territory integrity.
Okay.
But I think that we need a holistic approach, and the all military strategy is now failed.
Okay, Bakary Sambade from the Timbuktu Institute, speaking to us live there from Dakar. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for welcoming.
Now, the leaders of 12 African countries have met the German Chancellor Angela Merkel in Berlin for discussions on boosting investment in Africa. It's all part of Mrs. Merkel's Compact for Africa initiative set up during the German presidency of the G20 in 2017 to promote private sector investment in Africa.
We believe, and I am deeply convinced of this, that greater transparency can also attract more investors to these countries, of course, especially for German investors or other investors from G20 countries. For example, it is very important that trust prevails, that transparency prevails, that people know where to invest and under what conditions.
That was Germany's Chancellor Angela Merkel speaking earlier. Well, joining me from Berlin is the BBC's Damien McGuinness. Damien, I was looking at the website of a well-respected broadcaster and media house earlier today, and it says enthusiasm has waned for the compact with Africa, which has fallen short of expectations.
Yeah, there have been a few criticisms, Peter. That's because the whole point of this really is to allow and enable German businesses to invest more in Africa. So the idea, Angela Merkel has just said in that clip that we heard, is that the German government should minimise risks for German businesses going into Africa. That in turn would spark investment in African local economies. It would get jobs created that would really enable African economies to get moving. Now, the criticism is that this is allowing European or German companies to come into Africa, foreign companies, larger companies, to invest in Africa rather than enabling African companies themselves, smaller businesses, to get going. However, what we're looking at really is a sea change in German foreign policy. It's very interesting because until a couple of years ago, Germany really didn't talk very much about Africa at all and is still a relatively small player here. But what Chancellor Angela Merkel has decided to do is to really invest billions, we're talking billions of euros, in enabling foreign investors to have a bit more faith in Africa. So it's about minimising the risks. And really the idea would be to give African economies a kickstart, sort of local economies that might be struggling and might not have very high employment, to enable foreign investors to see that there are things happening in Africa and to give European investors a bit of faith in the African markets. But as I say, the problem is, or the criticism is, that if this only helps European companies and German companies in particular, and is not establishing a fair playing field for African companies, well, that's a big criticism that the government is going to have to counter.
And indeed, Damien, last year there was the announcement of a 1 billion euro grant which benefited some countries in Africa. Are we expecting another big announcement at the end of this summit?
Not necessarily. I think that what they do want to do is sign a few deals. So we have 12 leaders here from African countries who are hoping to really attract some German investment into those countries. So there have been some examples already. VW has signalled that it's going to open a plant in Africa. We've also seen Siemens have said they want to do more in Africa. So these are positive signs of German investment, which would create jobs and would spark some economic growth. But what you need is more than that, really, because I think what NGOs here are saying is it can't just come from big German companies. The other problem is that what we've seen over the past few years is money being pumped into this project, and there's lots of different projects. This conference is just one of them, really. And the aim really is to improve African economies in order to stem migration. Let's be honest about this. Germany has its own interests and has seen a lot of migrants coming from Africa included. And it feels that if you improve the economies in Africa, then that would stop migrants, because it would mean that people would not feel the need to leave their homes in the first place. But what we've seen so far over the past few years is that not that many jobs have been created and not that much investment has gone through. The government says it's still early days, and they're determined to push more money and to really inspire German businesses to invest in Africa. So the idea really is to, get some faith in Africa and faith in Africa business as well.
Damien McGuinness, live there from Berlin for us. Thank you very much. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines. Burundi says an armed group from Rwanda has attacked its military. An army spokesman said the attack happened on Sunday near the border. No casualty figures were given, but opposition media reports say dozens of Burundian soldiers were killed. A Rwandan minister has dismissed the claim as baseless. Niger's opposition leader is back in jail after returning from exile in France as part of his plans for political comeback. Hema Amadou was detained during Niger's 2016 elections on charges of baby trafficking, which he dismissed as politically motivated, an attempt to prevent him from challenging President Mamadou Issoufou. University students in the Kenyan capital have launched a campaign to end sexual harassment in the country's higher learning institutions. There is evidence that the problem is on the rise, and this campaign aims to get the government to impose measures to end it. Esther Okello Ogola reports from Nairobi.
Several student leaders in campuses around Nairobi, Kenya have joined together to start the Campus Me Too campaign, which aims to end sexual harassment in institutions of higher learning. This is a student-led campaign, but they have also partnered with UN Women and Action Aid. Now, in a survey done by Action Aid, 49% of female students in campuses across Nairobi, Kenya said that they had encountered sexual harassment. Another 24% of male students also say that they had encountered sexual harassment. 66% of those who took the survey also say that they had encountered sexual harassment from members of staff.
And when I got to his office, he drew the curtains in his office and closed the door, and he had asked me to sexually pleasurize him during that time, and this is the first time that I ever felt worthless. I felt filthy for having done that.
Now, some of the demands that the students are making to the government is to compel universities across the country to not only create awareness around issues of sexual harassment, but to also create safe spaces where students can go report their cases, and not only that, but to release audits of how cases have been handled and how they have been put to rest.
This is Focus on Africa with me, Peter Okwoche. Still to come, Mimi has all the sports. And Ivory Coast in the past 45 minutes have secured a spot for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics, beating Ghana on penalties in the Under-23 Africa Cup of Nations semi-finals. I'm Peter Okwoche. The top stories. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Ethiopia's Sidama region is set to vote in a referendum on Wednesday to decide whether or not they want to become the country's 10th semi-autonomous state. Home to 4 million people, they are Ethiopia's 5th largest ethnicity and have long sought autonomy, a right enshrined in the constitution. The vote is seen by many as a crucial test for Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed and his reformist agenda. Kalkidan Yebeltal reports from Hawassa in southern Ethiopia.
4 months ago, Hawassa, a lakeside city in southern Ethiopia, was hit by a wave of violence after referendum campaigners from the Sidama ethnic group protested against the government. The Sidama are Ethiopia's 5th largest ethnic group with more than 4 million people. They struggled to obtain a date for the referendum, and in July dozens were killed in clashes when they threatened to declare their autonomy unilaterally. But on Wednesday, millions will decide whether Ethiopia will have a 10th regional state.
It's very good news for me. I'm very happy. We're very keen. We waited for it for a long time. We struggled for it. Even our forefathers struggled for this referendum.
Last year the city was in chaos. Some people left because of the threat, but now it's very peaceful and we are eagerly waiting for the day.
The Electoral Board vows to make the referendum and the general election democratic.
This is a new beginning for us, and it bears a lot of productive results. The approach we take in this regard. So definitely we will implement the general election as well.
Currently, Ethiopia has 9 regional states that are formed mainly along ethnic and linguistic lines. Sidama campaigners say having their own regional state will give them a chance at self-administration and a larger budget share. They also say it will help them develop their culture and language better.
Well, Kalkidan joins us live now from Hawassa. Kalkidan, a lot of support for this referendum in the Sidama region, but there are those who say it could cause problems.
Yes, I can say that among other people, especially people who are living in the Sidama area but belonging to other ethnicities, there seems to be uncertainty and fear. Some of the people that we talk to, they express that they don't know what's going to happen after the result is announced. The area is prone to ethnic violence, especially in the past few years. So there is that history, that scar, and some people are saying that after the result of the referendum is announced, whether the violence will continue. Currently, there is a huge military and security presence in the area to tame the violence. So if this security presence is going to be removed, some say that they fear for their safety.
Okay, Kalkidan Yibeltal there, live from Hawassa in southern Ethiopia. Thank you very much. You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports. Mimi, lots of football in your bulletin.
Indeed, a lot of football today, Peter. Thank you. There are 7 more 2021 Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers today. 2 early kickoffs in Group E. Morocco comfortably beat host Burundi 3-0 with Achraf Hakimi, who is on loan to Borussia Dortmund from Real Madrid, with the winner. There was an upset in the other game with Ethiopia defeating Ivory Coast 2-1 under the guidance of local coach Abraham Mebratu. Ivory Coast took an early lead with a goal by Tottenham defender Serge Aurier, but a goal in the 26th minute by Ethiopia Shemeles Bekele proved to seal the deal for them. And 3 matches are going on as well. Just 2 have just finished. The latest result is Mauritania 2-1 against the Central African Republic, and Niger, that game as well, has just finished. Heavy defeat to Madagascar, 6-2 in that match. And the next match is still ongoing. That's Zambia against, as well, Zimbabwe. Zambia 1 and Zimbabwe 2. 2 more matches will be kicking off at 1900 GMT. Now on Monday, Kenya missed a chance to go top of their group in the 2021 Africa Cup of Nations qualifiers. They drew 1-1 at home in Nairobi to Togo. Belgium-based Johanna Omolo gave the Harambee Stars the lead, but Togo responded when Hakim Urosama headed home the equalizer from a corner in the 64th minute. The result now means that Egypt and Kenya are both on 2, while Togo are with 1 point at the bottom. Now, after the game, Togo's coach Claude Leroy said he wasn't thrilled about the refereeing.
It was not football today. I'm very sad for the African football to see what happens with the refereeing of tonight. I hope the CAF saw the game, they will analyze, and that means that it's terrible. You know, I love this continent, I love the football of this continent, but I think the first reaction I have at the end of this game is to cry, because I never saw that on the field. Never. That's why I think, like there was no football, I cannot answer to the question about football, because there was no football tonight.
An unhappy man right over there. After a rest day, the Under-23 Africa Cup of Nations play resumed today. The first match of the day saw Les Petits Éléphants, which translates as the small elephants, qualify for the Tokyo 2020 Olympics next year. The game went to penalties, where they then beat Ghana 3-2 in the shootout. So we now know one team that is through. Who between the hosts Egypt and South Africa will join them? That match kicks off in just a few minutes' time at 1800 GMT. The BBC's Mohamed Kutba is at the stadium in Cairo for us.
It's time to celebrate for the Elephants of the Ivory Coast as they sealed their qualification for the football tournament in the Tokyo Olympics in 2020, beating Ghana by penalty shootout. Cote d'Ivoire thought they won it when striker Youssef Daou scored the goal in the 84th minute, but Ghana's Evans Mensah forced the game to extra time by a stoppage time equalizer. Ghana now will have to wait for the third place playoff to fight for another shot of qualifying to the Tokyo Olympics, while the Ivory Coast will wait for the winner between Egypt and South Africa to compete for the trophy on the 22nd of November.
Peter, that's all the sport for now.
Many thanks and congratulations to Ivory Coast fans.
Indeed.
Thank you very much. Now, don't forget you can get in touch with me and some of the team on social media. I'm at Okwoche. But for now, from me, Peter Okwoche, and the rest of the Focus on Africa team, thanks for watching. Global is next.